was one comment, Bruce, and that is if you're interested in becoming a patron and you're a member of this society but not the museum, or vice versa, there are some descriptive flyers and some very brief application forms back there which will give you the avenue to do that if you choose to. So they're on the table as you're leaving if you choose to pick one up. So, Carole Stuart, I suspect what everybody in this room knows Carole. If not, she's the young lady that's in charge of the local history and genealogy department of the Collingwood Library. Does astonishing things. I can attest to that because I help her out periodically, and it's really quite something. But in my opinion, Carole is, save for perhaps one or two others in town, I think this town's premier historian now. Been here since 1990, and the depth of her knowledge and her enthusiasm and interest in this town is quite astonishing. So if you haven't been into the library to talk to Carole about local history, or if you haven't been in to talk about genealogy, you really need to go there because it's quite a treat. So, Carole, your topic tonight is of course quite relevant. It's 100 years since the First World War. Remembrance Day is coming up, and you've been working diligently on those names that are on the cenotaph and those Collingwood heroes that I think we're going to talk about tonight. So we're looking forward to it. It's an important message for tonight, so thank you for bringing that to us.
Thank you very much, Peter. Can everybody hear me all right? First of all, thank you very much for the young lady. That's always nice to hear, even when we're not. I just want to thank you all for having me here to speak tonight, particularly Peter Case, as I think he was instrumental in getting me to come. And my original idea was to do a PowerPoint presentation, and I had a totally different focus when I originally thought I was going to make this presentation tonight. And it has changed quite considerably since then, because I decided to take a different tack. So tonight you're not going to get a PowerPoint presentation, you're just going to have to listen to me talk. That may sound dreary, and I hope it isn't. I actually would like to comment too on Harry Hunt. I found it particularly interesting that when his family moved out to Vancouver, Harry missed all his friends at CCI so much that he rode his bicycle back from Vancouver. Now that had to have been in the late 1930s. It couldn't have been easy. He had to go across the Alps, or not the Alps, there's nothing much wrong with my geography, the Rockies. And he rode his bicycle back to see his friends, and then he rode it back again. So it is a testament to the sort of young man that he was. And I think he was a great loss. And I feel for his parents, who only had the one child, who have lost him in such a fashion. Anyhow, I want to speak to you about one other thing before I start my talk tonight. Over the last couple of years, actually about the last 4 years, I have been working quite hard on trying to develop a website for the local history and genealogy of Collingwood. And so I've had various Young Canada Work students who help me in the summer, and part of their task has been to work on this website because I'm not the techiest person in the world. And they were absolutely invaluable to me on doing this. I knew the framework and the design that I wanted to set up to do this, and it has been an ongoing battle. I've been rushing like crazy trying to get it so that I could maybe announce tonight that the site is live, and I'm doing that tonight. At the back there are some flyers. Some of you may have picked them up on the way in. I didn't arrive until a little bit later, so some of you may have already been seated by that. But this is a flyer which just outlines the sort of information that's found on there. And a lot of it is very historical, so it's not just a brief little summary. Some of the parts are, but other parts are a little bit more in depth. And when I started this, it never occurred to me, but it's tantamount to writing a book. The only difference is that I don't have it in hardcover, it's online. And I invite you all to have a look at the site. I would welcome your comments. There's still a lot of tweaking I have to do, but I did want to have it live for today, so it is live. And at the back of the room on the tables there, I've also brought 2 of the binders that I put together of information on the people who died in the First and Second World War, and also just information on what was happening in the town and events as they unfolded during those wartime years. And also information on the survivors of the war and their contributions that they made. So that's enough of that, and now I go get on to my talk. Now I know that some of you, I don't know, Joan had put something out today which sort of suggested that I was going to be talking about First and Second World War. This isn't the case. I'm actually just going to address the First World War. And I'm taking the perspective of following the lives of the people through those years. So I'm going to start with a poem. And this poem was picked up by one of our Canadian soldiers. It was taken off the window of one of the stores in England, and it spoke so well to him that he sent a copy of it home to his parents. It's called The Gallant Canadians. Who were the boys when they heard Britain's call, left their farms and workshops, good men and all, for empire ready to fight till they fall? The Canadians. Who were the boys when the days looked black, hung on to their trenches and broke the foe's back? With a shot for a shot and a crack for a crack, the Canadians. Who are the fighting blood boys on the hill, training to get fit to lick Kaiser Bill? Who are the boys when they hit to kill? Some fighters, the Canadians. Then cherish the memories of the boys we love best, and honor the men who stood the great test. At Ypres, Gallipoli, the Somme, and the rest, honor the Canadians. And that's what I'm here to do tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is to honor the memory of those Collingwood and district soldiers, men and women, who served in the Great War of 1914 to 1918. August 5th, 2014 will mark the 100th anniversary of Canada's entry into the conflict as the Dominion of Great Britain. And on August 18th, the Dominion of Canada confirmed this by voting to provide monetary support and any assistance that it could to Britain. To the young people of today, 100 years ago is so far back in history that it has little meaning to them. But for me, and I suspect for some others in this room, it really doesn't seem that far removed in time. My grandfather, my mother's father, happened to be in Berlin when the First World War broke out, and he was arrested and taken prisoner. And I still have the rather alarming telegram that my grandmother received from France. He was released shortly thereafter and returned to Canada. And when he came back, his son enlisted in November and was killed in September 1917. You have to understand, life was a little different in those days. You had kings and queens on the thrones, the Kaiser, the Tsar, they controlled the world. And the class system was very much alive and well. And it was alive and well, not to the same extent here in Collingwood. One of the things in the schools, the children's reading books extolled bravery and valor and honor and duty to God and country. And every classroom featured that world map, which featured the British Empire in pink, the empire on which the sun never set. So it is little wonder that when war was declared by Germany and by Britain, that the students of CCI and the farm boys of Nottawasaga and surrounding townships were enamored with the idea of seeing the world and relished the swashbuckling glamour of fighting for king and country. They wanted to enlist and enlist quickly because they didn't want to miss all the fun. It was expected that the war would be over by Christmas. The Grey and Simcoe Foresters militia, under the direction of Captain G.E. McLean and Captain Carmichael, were receiving recruits, and of the first 12 volunteers, 9 were deemed fit for service. And on August 10th, just 5 days after the declaration of war, a formal parade was held to escort these 9 young men to a good send-off and wish them good speed as they marched from the town hall to the railway station for embarkation. Of those 9, 3 never came home, and another 3 were wounded, and 3 did return. By August 27th, that's 2 weeks later, papers reported that another send-off of 32 young men, mainly from Collingwood, but also from Creemar, Newell, and Stainer, was being announced. They marched from the armory to the railway station, accompanied by the town band, the town mayor and town council, the Board of Trade, and the chairman of the Board of Education. The 2 companies hoped to become part of the 48 Highlanders, which they did, and among this group were 2 brothers, Charles and his brother Fred MacDonald, who I will make reference to later. Of this group, 4 were killed overseas and many others wounded. But it is not only the men who offered their services. The Collingwood Bulletin noted on August 22nd that 5 graduate students from the General Marine Hospital had volunteered their services for to serve overseas on the field of battle. My first thought when I was asked to make this presentation was to tell the individual stories of some of the soldiers. But rather I've decided to capture the story through letters written back home, each with its own perspective. October 13th is a day which seems to have some significance for Simcoe County. On October 13th, 1916, the 157th Battalion, after a period of training, boarded the 2 troop trains at Ellendale Station, bound for Europe. The Collingwood reported that the brave lads in the coaches were the cheeriest of them all, for even the heavens wept. The battalion arrived in Halifax on the 17th, set sail for Britain on the 18th, and after 12 turbulent days at sea, they landed in Liverpool. From there, they were forwarded to Whitley Camp outside London, where they remained until November 4th. There they learned how to do such things as dig trenches and learn how to fix bayonets. Then they were transferred to the camp at Bramshot for their final training before being shipped off to France. Mr. Atkinson, a former teacher from CCI, was the divisional bombing instructor at Bramshot when the Collingwood crew arrived. He says, "I was pushing my little old bicycle up the hill when I heard somebody yell, 'Hello, Addie!' Now, I hadn't heard that name since leaving Collingwood, so I stopped and lo, there was Bob Brophy, ex-Form 1B, loping across to see me, followed by other sundry young youths whom I used to persecute at old CCI. They nearly ate me up. So I went to their lines and resurrected the old crowd. Everybody seemed fine. It sure was a touch of home to see them all. They were a wondrous tale. They were full of wondrous tales of huge waves and stormy winds and despondent mariners and good knows all what. Well, shortly after, I had the pleasure of having some of them pass through my hands in a bombing school. Sergeant Frank White, an erstwhile pupil and cadet of mine, and Lionel Carmichael also sat in under my pedagogical nose. In the drab days leading up to Christmas, the boys scoured the countryside for holly and evergreen, and with flags and bunting, tried to make their little huts as close to home as they could make it. On Christmas Day it was raining, and at 9:30 they had a church service. But after the service, the mail had arrived. One of the boys wrote, "What this means no one at home can fully realize. It was without doubt the biggest spot in a darksome day. How the eye filled and the heart cheered at the reading of the home letters and the undoing of Christmas parcels." As the writer walked in and out of the tents, he saw on all sides men interested in nothing else save their letters. The rain, the mud, the war, everything passed out of sight in the memories of home and loved ones. When their training was near completion, Mr. Atkinson remarked that they are as fine a bunch of boys as I have ever had the pleasure to meet, and I have met a few in my short life. It is a shame to see them go. But at one fell swoop they were taken away, and I don't feel ashamed to say I was never nearer to weeping than at any time since the days of the hairbrush and razor strap. And so I can appreciate the feelings of the boys here. Most of them have been raised together, where I only know my men for 10 months. It is rotten in the true sense of the word, but it is the fortune of war, so let us not grouse. In February, the drafts began heading for France. Now we've heard from a teacher, a young soldier, and now Colonel Curry from Ottawa, who describes the move of troops to the front lines. Monday, May 15th. It was a glorious morning, and pretty soon we were at the quay. I learned that the French have a wonderful system of moving troops. You call them, and they supply you with a number of boxcars, a van car, an officer's car, and flat cars to handle your wagons. The men were put 40 in a car. They had to stand as there was no room to lie down. I felt sorry for them, but they did not grumble. The officers were put A2 compartment. When we were loaded, I was handed a ticket on which was marked the halts and the times to eat. Here we had at least 24 hours ahead of us. In the morning at about 7 o'clock, we halted to cook and get breakfast. It is a rather serious business looking after 1,000 men and over 60 horses and mules. That night we rattled along at a lively pace, and in the morning we came to the city of... An officer came on board and took my ticket. Apparently we were in for another night on the train. When we arrived at our destination, I was told we could march 5 miles out into the country or billet at a new hospital in the course of erection. I said the hospital was for us, as my men had been 2 days and nights standing up in boxcars. And when I went along the platform at one stop, they amused me by bleating like a lot of sheep. Even war and hardships have an amusing side, and the men were as cheerful and as happy as if they were at the Toronto exhibition. I find that a bit of a stretch. Private Angus McCoy, who arrived at a later date, was to comment of his arrival in France. The first day we marched 6 miles with heavy matching order, and believe me, when I say heavy matching order, it means some load. However, we landed that night in France feeling very tired, slept in bell tents, 10 men to a tent. Only small tents with our large packs. We sure hadn't any more than 5 cents worth of room. He would later say, "Fred Day is fine, and Norman McAllister also. And I was talking to Ernest Brown today. Ernie came over with a 157th and was wounded in April, but he looks fine now. There were a few more Collingwood boys around here. George Page, Art, Howard Williamson, and a few more, but I forget all their names. Wishing you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I remain, Angus." Major McLean, who was an officer at the Army, who was the officer at the Armory, who was taking in those new recruits in August of 1914, wrote of his experience when he arrived at the trenches. From headquarters, I was sent to A Company in the first line trenches. After spending an hour getting acquainted and having a bit to eat, started out on a tour of the trenches, which took till 5 a.m. To describe the mud, water, and darkness as I saw it that night would require a better writer than me. If you can imagine the condition of our garden in early spring, the soil is the same. Reaching over our knees in many places, a steady drizzling rain, black as ink, except for Fritz, would throw up one of his brilliant star shells, which, by the way, helped quite a lot, for we were not allowed to use our flashes or even smoke. Feeling our way a lot by touching the sides of the trenches, where they were not blown in. Just to give you an idea of how careful one has to be and how alert Fritz is, we were making our way up one of the saps, extending to within 100 yards of his trenches. We must have made some noise going through the water, for suddenly he opened up his machine gun on us. However, we ducked into the mud and his bullets passed over. When arriving back at the dugout, was plastered with clay from head to foot and soaking wet. There will no doubt be some of the clay on me when I get back to Canada. Had a rest till 10 a.m. Always sleep in clothes with boots on. In fact, haven't had my clothes off since leaving England. Next morning had a good breakfast of porridge, ham, eggs, and coffee. I wonder if the troops got that. Yesterday, the artillery in our rear and Fritz's gun up front kept up a steady bombardment all day. Shells of different caliber were whistling through the air overhead, the differing sizes being easily distinguished by their own peculiar music. Fritz got some of his to explode close enough to us to be interesting, but not particularly dangerous. Then again, just as the new year was coming in, our artillery sent over a few salvos of iron rations, just as a greeting. Today, I'm alone in the dugout. The other officers are away, excepting for the rats. And they are, without exaggeration, as tame and as large as small cats. The night we moved here, they were about by the dozens. Just heard from one of the officers of the battalion where Carmichael belongs, got hit by a sniper today. The trenches are so bad, many move overland to escape the mud. Now you have to understand, in the early years of the war, aircraft were being employed by both sides. And these aircraft, generally speaking, they were gentlemen on both sides. They didn't fire on each other, but they were very valuable for surveillance. And but as time went on, they became a little less patient with each other. Rifles, they started using rifles, but that was very difficult to fire, between the struts and without hitting anything. They certainly didn't want to hit their propellers, and it didn't bode very well for accuracy. So more and better aircraft were being designed and refitted with armaments so that they too became fighting machines. The Germans were the first to develop an efficient killing tool with their Eindecker planes, designed by Anthony Fokker. He was actually a Dutchman. With their interrupter machine guns, which meant that they could fire through the propellers. So now the soldiers in the trenches were not only being bombarded by shells of heavy artillery, sniper bullets, machine guns, and hand grenades, but also from above by aircraft equipped with machine guns and bombs. There was also the possibility of being attacked from below by trenchers who dug under enemy lines to plant explosives beneath the enemy's trenches. And then, of course, there was the insidious attacks of deadly mustard gas. And the mud. The mud where countless people were sucked down to their deaths. Well, we've heard from a teacher, a colonel, and a major on the front lines. Now, let's hear from a private. In a letter to his mother from hospital in Edinburgh, Private Tompkins of Singhampton, who lived through the Battle of the Somme and Vimy Ridge, talks of his experience at Vimy Ridge. We entered the trenches on May 2nd, sometime during the night, and took up an outpost some distance in advance of our front line, in a shell hole. We spent the remainder of the night digging small funk holes around the inside, large enough for protection from the light shrapnel, as it was flying pretty fast during the day. We were compelled to be perfectly still in the burning sun, as the slightest movement would have proved fatal, as enemy airplanes were very active and were flying quite low. During the day, we saw several machines brought down, most of which were in flames. Well, during the night, of course, we had no sleep at all, and with the first indication of daylight, our batteries opened fire. Fritz replied heartily with his artillery and then machine guns, the latter being very effective. The trenches were low and pretty well blown to pieces as a result, and as a result they were filled with dead of both enemy and comrades. And the field on all sides were strewn as hundreds had fallen during the previous day, and of course there was no time for burying parties during the night, so I don't suppose half the wounded were found. I was one of a party of about 20 detailed to return to the front lines at about 10 a.m. with stretchers for the fellows we couldn't bring out before. The snipers were very active, and we had considerable difficulty reaching the line through the low trenches, crawling on our hands and knees in many places, and trailing the stretchers behind us. But on reaching the line and getting our patients on the stretcher, we made little white flags with bandages and started back overland. Thank the Lord, Fritz respected them for once, and not a rifle shot was fired at us as we carried them back. But as we neared the dressing station, he opened fire on us with high explosive artillery, planting them thick and fast within 50 feet of us. This is where I and several comrades were hit, but not killed, and we managed to get our patients into cover without further injury. I had my wound dressed and walked back to the horse lines, where we were taken to the Bruce Canadian Casualty Station. On November 21st, Clarence Peachy wrote to his parents after the Battle of Passchendaele. There we were, 10 of us went over the top at Passchendaele Ridge. I guess you saw it in the papers. There was only the corporal and myself came out, the remainder wounded and killed. It was awful. Of 200, there were only 34 of us to come out. The hardest battle Canadians ever had, worse than Hill 70. And a letter from Private D.A. Bell to his sister from a convalescent hospital. I've been moving around quite a bit lately, but I always get your letters. There are a lot of Canadian soldiers here, about 1,700 of them, 17,000 of them. We're talking in a convalescent hospital, by the way, 17,000. This is the third convalescent hospital I've been in. But if I have to go back to the trenches, I don't want you to be downhearted, for some of us boys will be going back to dear old Canada again, and I may be one of them. Somebody has got to fight. And if the boys of Canada don't come out, well, we old boys have got to play the game, for it has to be played to the finish. You wonder at their tenacity. So where do we go from here? There are as many stories as there were soldiers who went to the front. I mentioned earlier about the importance of the date of October 13th. Well, October 13th, 1917, 1 year to the day after those two troop trains left the Allendale station, 225 of the men on those trains had been either killed, wounded, or poisoned with gas. 6 of the dead were from Collingwood. that same day, the Service Act was passed so that reinforcements could be sent to maintain Canada's fighting strength. The following week, 440 men were examined in Collingwood, and each man was expected to report by November 10th, 1917. There are many stories of distinguished bravery on the battlefield and medals awarded. Every family in town was affected by the war overseas, and many lost sons and daughters. There are 107 names engraved on the cenotaph from the First World War, and it would appear that there are a few others whose names should be added. And I want to bring those forward to the council to see whether this is possible. I hope you're not disappointed that I didn't feature more individual stories in this talk, but I will speak for a moment about the two brothers, Charles MacDonald and his brother Fred. They signed up in August of 1914 and left Canada for England on September 23rd, and were part of that second group that I spoke of at the beginning of my talk. They both served with the 48th Highlanders, and by February 1915 had arrived in the trenches of France. In April, in a battle near Langemarck, the two brothers were wounded. Fred fared better than Charles, for although wounded, he was taken behind the lines by his own troops and was able to recuperate in hospital in Rouen. He later rejoined his battalion. Charles, on the other hand, was severely wounded, suffering 6 wounds from shrapnel. He was captured by the Germans and was hospitalized for some time at Oberhausen. When hospitalization was no longer deemed necessary, he was sent to a prisoner of war camp, where he endured unimaginable hardships. Some of those camps were salt mines. His health continued to deteriorate, and he became so grave that after serving 3 years as a POW, he was taken to Switzerland, where he was passed over to the British Red Cross. After recuperating in Britain, he was returned home 4 years after his arrival in Europe. Charles Henry Lawrence MacDonald, on his return to Collingwood, was taken on by John Wilson, where he worked to become an architect. When a competition was held for the design of the War Memorial for Collingwood, he submitted a sample sculpture of his bugle boy, called Reveille, using his brother Fred as his model. It seems fitting that a man who endured so much during those war years should have his work chosen as a memorial to his fallen comrades. But this talk is not just about those who died in battle. It is also about those who fought, were injured, were gassed, were taken prisoner of war, and lived. What they witnessed and lived through on a daily basis, some for years, they carried with them the rest of their lives. They lived through the unimaginable and came home different men from the innocent boys who left with dreams of glory. Most of them could not talk of their experiences. These are our forgotten heroes. Thank you. Oh, by the way, there are 2 binders at the back on the 2 wars. If anybody would like to look through them, it's some of the information we have compiled.
Carole, if you want to ask for any questions, or I can do what I'm going to do right now.
Okay.
Okay. Over here. It says to Carole if she wanted to ask for any questions from the audience. I'm sure someone will have something.
Yes, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I noticed downtown Collingwood they put the poppies on the lampposts, but down in eastern Canada they put the photographs of the dead people up. So for instance, Harry Hunt would be on one of the lampposts and all the other people at the CCR would be much more meaningful than just having the blank poppies there.
Actually, that's an excellent idea. And if anybody has any...
Could you repeat that question? That was just the statement.
Okay.
Down in Eastern Canada, I saw on Canada AM, they have photographs of the dead on the lampposts. Whereas we in Collingwood have just got the poppies on the lampposts now, which is nice, but even if we had a red background for the First World War, blue background for the Second World War, maybe a green background for recent deaths. So like Harry Hunt's pictures and all the other ones from the CCI could be on the lampposts.
We did have 107 people, so I don't know if we have enough lampposts.
Right, I'm saying, it just would make it nicer, I think.
I really like that idea, and the one thing that I would like, if anybody here has any photographs of people in their own family who fought in the First World War, or the Second World War for that matter, I'm looking to collect pictures of every soldier and nurse or person who served during those wars. And I would appreciate any that people could bring into me. I have photographs of some of the people, but I don't have them of all. Sometimes in the newspapers they had photographs, but other ones didn't. And I certainly would like to have that. But I really liked your idea. It would make it meaningful. Good.
Anyone else? You? All right. Well, thank you, Carole. That's such an interesting and informative presentation on our local citizens. They were all heroes who served their country in a time when they were all desperately needed, and we do remember them. Carole is such a dedicated person, and she does such an amazing job in researching Collingwood's past residents, and I can speak from my own experience how it's just amazing how she can find information about past generations who lived around here, and she's found relatives of mine that I didn't even know were around here, and she phones me up very excited that she has found another relative of mine, so it's always so interesting. Anyway, if you want to learn more about Collingwood's history, or if you're researching your genealogy, just be sure to visit Carole at the Collingwood Library. And thank you again, Carole, and we have something here we'd like you to accept on behalf of the Collingwood Historical Society.